There is a sound that combat veterans across 12 species have described to me over the years. It doesn't have a name in most languages, but the Velhari call it Thur-Aken, which translates roughly to the silence before something that cannot be taken back. I heard that sound twice in my life. The first time was on the border of the Kareth Expanse during the Succession Wars, 40 cycles ago. I was young. I was terrified. A Dravathi dreadnought had just dropped out of Fold space and was positioning its main arrays directly at the station where I worked. Every screen in the facility had gone dark. Every alarm had stopped mid-scream. And for one perfect, terrible moment, the entire universe seemed to exhale and hold its breath at once. Thur-Aken. I survived that day because the Dravathi commander received new orders and folded back out before firing. I spent 3 weeks afterward unable to sleep. I filed my incident report. I moved on. The second time I heard that sound was on Kelvarath 9, on the 14th day of the 7th month, 43rd year of the Galactic Compact. And this time, nothing folded away. I want to be careful here. I want to tell this right, because I've seen the versions that circulate on the information networks, the dramatized reconstructions, the species supremacist rewrites that make it a simple story about one side being cowardly and another being brave. That's not what this was. That's not even close to what this was. What this was, what I watched from the observation gallery on the upper level of the Kelvarath 9 diplomatic station, was something I don't have clean words for. I've been an archivist for 31 years. I specialize in conflict documentation. I have walked through the ruins of 17 battlefields, cataloged the aftermath of wars that killed billions, and read testimony from creatures who have survived things that would unmake most minds. I still can't describe the 14th day of the 7th month in clean words. But I'll try, because that's my job, and because the humans who were there that day, the 7 of them, just 7, deserve to have it told right. Let me give you the context first. Kelvarath 9 is not a beautiful station. I want you to understand that. Some of the older archives make it sound like some gleaming jewel of galactic diplomacy, all clean lines and softly lit corridors, and the gentle hum of civilized progress. Those archives were written by people who weren't there, or by people who needed it to sound that way for political reasons. Kelvarath 9 is a working station. It smells of recycled atmosphere and thruster coolant, and the particular ozone and salt scent that Marathi delegates give off when they're anxious, which is always. The corridors are wide enough to accommodate the largest known sapient species, the Grothkai, who stand roughly 4 meters at the shoulder and require specialized atmospheric envelopes just to move through standard gravity sections. And that width makes them feel vast and cold, and somehow lonely even when they're crowded. The observation gallery where I spent most of that 14th day is on the eastern arc of the station's upper ring. 3 floors of transparasteel curved outward over the docking bay complex below. Hundreds of ships at any given moment, freighters, diplomatic transports, military escorts, the occasional research vessel that had stopped for refueling and resupply. The bay lights are amber-tinged, which is a compromise between the visual spectrums of the most commonly docked species, and everything down there always looks slightly warm, slightly golden, like an old photograph of something that hasn't happened yet. I remember watching a Hekari bulk freighter ease into berth 7 that morning. I remember the way its loading ramps extended in sequence, 3 great mechanical arms dropping down with a sound like distant thunder. I remember thinking it was a good morning, calm, the kind of morning that makes you grateful for boring work in a complicated universe. Then the Voakai arrived. You have to understand who the Voakai are before you can understand what happened next. I don't mean you need to understand their history or their biology or their political structure, though all of that is relevant. I mean you need to feel who they are in your gut, that same instinctive animal recognition that fires somewhere deep in the brain stem when you see something your body knows is more dangerous than you. The Volcae are the Galactic Compact's acknowledged apex military species. They have held that designation for 217 cycles without serious challenge. They are roughly bipedal, though calling them bipedal is like calling a collapsing star warm, technically accurate, and catastrophically insufficient. They stand between 2 and 2.5 meters depending on caste. Their exoskeletal structure is partially internal and partially external, which means their skin, if you can call it that, has the density and tensile strength of low-grade battle armor. Their peripheral nervous system processes threat stimuli approximately 4 times faster than a human's. Their pain tolerance is, by clinical measurement, nearly absolute. There are 17 compact-recognized wars in which the Volcae participated over the last 3 centuries. They won 15 of them outright. They controlled the outcomes of the other 2. When a Volcae delegation arrives at a diplomatic station, everyone knows, not because of announcement protocols or pre-filed transit documentation, though those exist, because you feel it. Some combination of posture, movement, the particular way they occupy space, it changes the air of whatever room they're in. I've spoken to xenobiologists who believe it's a subconscious pheromonal broadcast that evolved as a dominance mechanism across their species. Whatever the cause, the effect is universal. When the Volcae come in, everyone around them adjusts, makes space, recalibrates. 42 Volcae warriors arrived at Kelvarath 9 on the morning of the 14th day. 42. I know because I counted from the observation gallery. I counted twice because my first count didn't seem right, and even my second count didn't seem right, and I remember standing there gripping the gallery railing with both hands thinking, why are there 42 Volcae warriors on a diplomatic station? 42 was not a diplomatic escort. 42 was a statement. They moved through the lower bay in a formation that wasn't quite a military march, but wasn't quite not one either. The kind of organized movement that maintains plausible deniability. We are simply walking together, in the same direction, with weapons. Their weapons were sheathed, technically. A Volcae warrior's Thrak-Tau, the ceremonial/practical blade that every ranked warrior carries, is considered sheathed when it is enclosed in its carrying sleeve. The carrying sleeve is made of a material that, in some lights, looks like cloth. It is not cloth. It is a tensile weave that can be split open with a single wrist rotation, releasing the blade in under half a second. 42 warriors, all Thrak-Tau technically sheathed, moving in organized formation through a civilian diplomatic station at 9 in the morning. I called down to the station duty office. I got Commander Rikavas, a Selani who had been managing Kelvarath 9 security for 11 cycles. She is the most unflappable person I have ever met. She answered my call with her usual tone, measured, precise, slightly impatient because she was always doing 4 things at once. She went quiet when I told her. Not for long, maybe 2 seconds. Then she said very quietly, "Get the humans." 7 humans were stationed at Kelvarath 9 at that time. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 7 against 42 Volcae warriors. The mathematics of that equation, run through any standard military projection model, produces an outcome probability so catastrophically one-sided that the models round it to 0 on the human side. I have run those projections. I ran them that morning, in fact, in the 15 minutes it took for the humans to gear up and deploy to the lower bay. I ran them 3 times. Every time, 0. The humans' names are part of the official record, and I'll use them here because they asked me to. They were very specific about that when I conducted my post-incident interviews. They didn't want to be called the human contingent, or the Terran security element, or any of the institutional labels the Compact loves to paste over actual people. They wanted their names used. So Sergeant Major Alejandro Cruz, Master Sergeant Yuki Tanaka, Staff Sergeant Dmitry Volkov, Sergeant First Class Priya Okonkwo, Sergeant Ramona Thibodeau, Corporal A. Chuan Jun Lee, Private First Class Nadia Voss. 7 people, 7 humans, average age 29 Terran years. Commander Rikavas called them in. They responded in 4 minutes flat. 4 minutes from receiving the call to arriving at the lower bay with full kit. I timed it from the observation gallery. 4 minutes. The Volkai had been in the bay for 11 minutes by then, and they had already calmly, without visible aggression, surrounded the entrance to the compact diplomatic archive storage facility. Berth 3 Alpha, which contained, among other things, the original sealed documentation from the Kelvarath Accords, the founding documents of the Galactic Compact itself. That's when I understood what they were there for. Before I describe what happened next, I need to tell you something about the Volkai commander that day. His name was Harek Vel. He held the rank of Vorthal, which translates approximately to Commander of Supreme Engagement, a rank that only exists when the Volkai are on an operation they consider significant enough to require their best. Harek Vel had won 11 single combat engagements against officers from 6 different species. He had commanded the Volkai legions at the Battle of Sarath Prime, where his forces broke through a defensive line that 3 independent military analysts had certified as impenetrable. I spoke to him later, after everything. I conducted his testimony myself. He told me something I've thought about almost every day since. He said, I had studied humans. I had read every combat report, every threat assessment, every behavioral analysis the Compact had on file. I believed I understood them. He paused. He looked out the window of the interview room. He is not a creature that shows vulnerability easily. His facial structure doesn't accommodate most of the expressions that other species use to signal uncertainty. But something in the set of his posture, in the way the light caught the edge of his exoskeleton, communicated something I can only describe as haunted. He said, I did not understand them. No document understands them. You have to see them. You have to stand in front of them and see their eyes, and then you understand why the old stories say what they say. I asked him what he meant by the old stories. He said, the ones we tell our young, the ones that begin, do not wake the sleeping creature that has forgotten it is a predator. Let me tell you about Alejandro Cruz first. He came from a place in Earth's western hemisphere called Sonora. I know this because he told me during our post-incident interview, and because he had a small enamel pin on the inside of his kit bag, a desert landscape, ochre and sage green, a cactus silhouetted against a sunset. He told me it was from his grandmother. He told me she had made him promise to come home. He was 34 years old. He had been in Terran military service since he was 18. He had served in 3 compact joint operations, the Naraki Corridor Incident, the Gessel Station Defense, and the Outer Rim Resupply Protection Program. He had 17 commendations across those 3 operations, which is not a number I invented for effect. That is his actual file count. When he walked into the lower bay on the morning of the 14th day, he walked in first. That wasn't protocol. Protocol was for the ranking officer to assess from a covered position, while the lower ranks established a perimeter. But Cruz walked in first, and the 6 others spread out behind him, and he walked directly toward the 42 Volkai warriors like he was walking to a briefing he was mildly late for. I watched this from the observation gallery above. I remember gripping the railing so hard my hands cramped. Cruz stopped approximately 8 meters from the forward edge of the Volkai formation. Harek Vel was at the center. They faced each other. 8 meters. For context, the minimum recommended safe engagement distance for a Volkai warrior in active combat posture is 30 meters. That's not doctrine. That's the distance at which a standard reaction time humanoid has a statistically meaningful chance of responding before the Volkai warrior reaches them. Cruz stopped at 8. I found out later during interviews that it was intentional. He told me, "You don't give them distance. Distance is permission. Distance says you're afraid. I was afraid, but I didn't give them the distance." Haragvel spoke first. He used Compact Standard, which is the diplomatic lingua franca that all Compact members are required to understand. He announced, formally, with the procedural language of legitimate authority, that the Voakai delegation was exercising a contested archive provision under Compact Administrative Code 7 Delta 9, and that they required access to the sealed documentation in storage, Bay 3 Alpha, for purposes of a formal record challenge. Code 7 Delta 9 is real. I should tell you that. It exists in the Administrative Code. It is meant to allow member species to formally contest historical records they believe have been falsified or misrepresented. It is a paper process. It involves filing forms and waiting for a review board and submitting authentication evidence, and going through a process that takes, on average, 19 months. It does not involve 42 warriors. Cruz let Haragvel finish his speech. He didn't interrupt. He didn't shift his stance. He stood there with his hands at his sides, not on his weapons, not moving, and he listened to the entire formal declaration. Then he said, "No." Just that. One word. And the whole bay went absolutely still. I've talked to witnesses from 17 different species about that moment. Not just the humans and the Voakai, the Selani loading crew that was working Berth 6, the 3 Marathi academics who had been touring the archive facility and were still inside when the lockdown hit, the Hikari freighter captain whose crew had stopped their unloading work and was watching from the ramp of Berth 7. Every one of them, across all their different neurologies and sensory systems and cultural frameworks, described the same thing when Cruz said no. They described a silence that had weight. Thurakin. Haragvel looked at Cruz for a long moment. I've since studied the Bay security footage frame by frame. The look on Haragvel's face during those seconds is not contempt. It's not anger. It's not even surprise exactly. It's something more complicated. Something that the Voakai facial anatomy is not really designed to express but is clearly struggling to contain. Haragvel said, "You are one human sergeant. You do not have the authority." Cruz said, "The authority isn't the question. The answer is no. You're not going into that archive. You're welcome to file Code 7 Delta 9 through the proper administrative process, and I'll personally walk you to the documentation office right now. But 42 armed warriors don't walk into the Compact's founding archive. Not today. Not while I'm standing here. I want to pause here and tell you something that the combat reconstructions always leave out." Cruz's hands were shaking. I could see it from the gallery. Not much. Maybe 2 millimeters of tremor, no more. But I was watching closely, and I was watching him specifically, and I could see it, this faint, fine tremor running through his fingers. He was terrified. Of course he was terrified. He's a human. He has all the same threat response biology every human has. Standing 8 meters from 42 Voakai warriors with 6 colleagues behind him, and 30-something years of animal self-preservation instinct screaming in his hindbrain, he was terrified. But his voice was completely steady, and his hands stayed at his sides. And he did not move. I've thought about that tremor more than almost anything else about that day, because I think that's where the real story lives. Not in the dramatic confrontation, not in the words exchanged, not in the eventual outcome. The real story is in a 34-year-old human standing 8 meters from the most dangerous warriors in the known galaxy, shaking imperceptibly in his hands, completely unmoved in his feet. That's what courage actually looks like. It doesn't look like not being afraid. It looks like being afraid and doing it anyway, and not giving fear the space it's asking for. Haragvel took one step forward. I need to explain what this meant. Among the Voakai, A single step forward from a commander in standoff position is not ambiguous. It is not casual. It is a specific gesture with a specific meaning that every compact diplomatic briefing document covers in its chapter on Volkai Protocol. One step forward in this context means we are done talking, and what happens next is your responsibility. It is the last communication before action. Every species in that bay understood what it meant. I watched the Hikari crew on the Berth 7 ramp take 4 steps backward in unison, like one organism. I watched the 3 Marathi academics inside the archive facility drop below window level. I watched the Selani loading crew stop completely. 17 beings, all movement suspended, all attention locked on the bay floor 8 meters below where the man and the commander stood facing each other. Crews watched Harekvel take the step. And then something happened that I have watched in the security footage hundreds of times and still cannot entirely process. Crews smiled. Not a big smile, not triumphant or mocking or anything theatrical. A small, almost private smile, like something had confirmed a suspicion he'd been carrying for a while. Like the universe had just done exactly what he expected it to do, and he found that, in some bone-deep way, almost reassuring. He said quietly enough that the bay mics barely caught it. There it is. And then he spoke to his team without turning his head. He said, spread to positions. Nobody draws first. We hold the line. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not what anyone in that bay expected. Including, I think, the Volkai. The 6 humans behind crews moved, not toward the Volkai, not in any aggressive configuration. They spread, the way crews had ordered, into a loose arc that covered every approach to the archive entrance at Berth 3 Alpha. Each of them took a position and held it. None of them drew weapons. None of them adopted the combat stances that compact military doctrine recommends for a numerically disadvantaged defensive hold. They just stood there. 7 humans, spread across an 8-meter arc, standing between 42 Volkai warriors and the thing they had come to take. The Volkai began to separate. The formation split into 3 wings at textbook movement, the kind that turns a facing standoff into a 3-angle envelopment. I recognized it from the tactical manuals. Any defensive position faced with a 3-angle envelopment from superior numbers has 2 choices: pull back and consolidate or collapse. The humans didn't do either. Master Sergeant Yuki Tanaka moved to counter the right-wing separation. She was 31 years old, from a city in the Japanese archipelago of Earth called Sapporo, and she had spent 4 years working border security operations in the most volatile region of the Gesell Corridor. She moved like she'd done this before, not fast, not aggressive, just purposeful. She stepped into the gap the right wing was trying to open, and she stood in it, and she looked at the 3 Volkai warriors trying to move through that space with an expression that stopped them in their tracks. I asked her about it later, about that expression. She thought for a moment, then she said, I was just showing them I knew what they were doing, that's all. Sometimes that's enough. When people realize you see the move, they stop making it. Staff Sergeant Dmitry Volkov countered the left wing. He is 6'2", broad across the shoulders in a way that even Volkai warriors apparently registered, because 2 of the left-wing members slowed their advance when he stepped into position. He told me later he was thinking about his daughter, who was 3 years old, who he had promised he would call that evening. He said thinking about that helped with the fear. It gave him something concrete to hold on to, while everything else was terrifyingly abstract. Sergeant First Class Priya Okonkwo took the center approach gap to Cruz's right. She was 27 years old and had been in compact joint service for 5 years, and she had qualified as a threat negotiation specialist in addition to her combat certifications, which meant she understood both how to fight and how to make fighting unnecessary. She told me she spent those 4 minutes watching Harekvel's hands, not his face, his hands, because she knew that with Volkai command cast, the hands telegraphed intent before the body moved. She said his hands never moved into action position. She said that was when she knew. Herrick Vel did not advance. I want to be precise about this, because the retellings I've seen in circulation are not precise about it. Some make it sound like the humans attacked. Some make it sound like the Vokai backed down from cowardice or miscalculation. Some make it sound like there was a dramatic single combat resolution, hero against champion, the kind of clean narrative that makes good entertainment and bad history. What actually happened is simultaneously less dramatic and far more significant. Herrick Vel stopped. He looked at Cruz. He looked at the 6 others in their positions. He looked at the humans who were outnumbered 6-1 by the deadliest warriors in the known galaxy and who were standing there, shaking imperceptibly in their hands, holding a line that military mathematics said they could not hold. And he stopped. His wings stopped. The 42 Vokai warriors, the ones who had just split into a 3-angle envelopment configuration, the ones whose tactical position was objectively superior in every measurable dimension, stopped. The bay was so quiet I could hear the environmental system cycling. I could hear the distant clang of something settling in the superstructure. I could hear my own breathing. Then Herrick Vel took one step back. The step back among the Vokai means the opposite of the step forward. It means, we are not done with this, but we are done with this here and now. It means withdrawal. Chosen withdrawal, not routing, not retreat, not defeat in the field sense, but withdrawal. His wings contracted. The 42 reformed into their original forward-facing formation. And Herrick Vel said, in compact standard, in a voice that the bay mics caught clearly, "The administrative process. You said you would walk us to the documentation office." Cruz said, "I'll walk you there myself." And he did. I watched Cruz walk Herrick Vel and 3 Vokai escorts to the documentation office on level 4. I watched through the corridor monitors because I didn't want to miss a moment of it. Cruz walked at a completely normal pace. He didn't hurry. He didn't give any of the body language that would signal relief or victory or anything other than, "We're going to the documentation office now. This is a normal administrative process. Everything is completely ordinary." At level 4, he held the door open for Herrick Vel. Herrick Vel looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked through the door. The remaining 38 Vokai warriors returned to their ships and departed Kelvarath 9 within 2 hours of the incident. They filed Code 7 Delta 9 documentation through proper channels 8 days later. The administrative process is currently ongoing. 7 humans went back to their regular rotation. I interviewed all 7 of them. I interviewed them individually over 3 days in a small conference room on level 7 with a window that looked out over the station's exterior array and the stars beyond. I take notes by hand, old habit, and the subjects tend to be more open when I'm not behind a recording device, even though the room is equipped with sensors, and they know it. What I want to tell you about those interviews is not the tactical breakdown or the incident chronology, because you have that above. What I want to tell you about is the things that happened on the edges, the small observations, the moments that stuck with me. Private First Class Nadia Voss was the youngest, 22, from a coastal city in the northern part of the European continent called Bergen. She had been in service for 14 months, and the Kelvarath 9 posting was her first extended assignment outside of training. She was the last to deploy on the 14th, not because she was slow, but because she stopped to tighten a piece of kit that was loose, and she refused to go out there with anything that wasn't properly secured. That detail is in her own account. When I asked her what she was thinking during those 4 minutes, she thought about it for a while. She looked out the window, then she said, "I kept thinking about how quiet it was. The station is never quiet. There's always noise, the engines, the ventilation, people moving around, ships coming in. But during those 4 minutes it was so quiet, and I kept thinking, when it gets this quiet, everyone watching is deciding something, and I didn't want them to decide wrong." I asked her what she meant by deciding wrong. She said, I mean I didn't want them to see us break, because if we broke, everything breaks, not just the line. Everything. She was 22 years old, and she had been thinking about the weight of symbolic moments in the middle of the most frightening 4 minutes of her life. Corporal Hwanjun Lee was 25, from a coastal city in Earth's Korean peninsula. He was the team's equipment specialist and had qualified on 17 different weapons platforms, which I mention not because weapons were used, but because I want you to understand he was someone who had spent years learning to use force effectively, and who stood there for 4 minutes without once touching a weapon. He told me the hardest part wasn't the fear. He said the fear was almost clarifying. It focused everything, stripped away anything that wasn't essential, left him very aware and very present. He said the hardest part was watching Cruz. I asked him why. He said, because I could see he was scared too. And when you're scared and you see the person next to you is also scared, there's a moment where it could go either way. Either you both break or neither of you does. And there was a moment, just a second maybe, where I thought, one of us is going to have to decide this first. And then he smiled. When the Volkai commander stepped forward, he smiled and I thought, okay, we're not breaking. He paused. Then he said, I've served with a lot of people. I've never served with anyone who could make me feel okay in the middle of that kind of moment. Sergeant Ramona Thibodeau was 28, from a region in Earth's North American continent called Louisiana. She spoke with the particular cadence of that region, a rhythm that I, as someone who has spent considerable time studying human vocal patterns, found genuinely musical. She was the team's communications specialist, which meant she had been in simultaneous contact with Commander Rickovass and the station's emergency response team throughout the incident. She told me Commander Rickovass had offered twice to send additional non-human security personnel into the bay. She had twice declined to relay the offer to Cruz, because Cruz had told her at the start of deployment to hold all non-essential traffic until he gave her the signal, and she had trusted that. I asked her if she second-guessed that decision. She laughed, not a big laugh, a quiet one, a little surprised. She said, every 10 seconds. Every 10 seconds I thought I should tell him, and then I thought, no. He told me to trust his read, and if I can't trust his read, then what are we doing here? She paused. Then, he didn't need more bodies. More bodies was the wrong answer. More bodies made it a numbers problem, and we couldn't win a numbers problem. What he was doing wasn't a numbers problem. What he was doing was something else. I asked her what it was. She said he was making them see us. I saved Cruz for last. He came in on the third day morning session with a cup of the dark, bitter liquid humans call coffee that he had made himself in the break room down the hall, because he said the station's automated dispensers made it wrong. He sat across from me. He was relaxed in the way that people who have done difficult things and come through them intact are relaxed, not casual, not unconcerned, but genuinely settled in himself. I asked him to take me back to the moment Harakvel took the step forward. He was quiet for a few seconds. He looked at the window. He said, when he did that, I had about half a second where everything in my body said, you have made a catastrophic mistake. And then that passed, and what I had left was it was almost like stillness. Like I'd already made the decision and there was nothing left to be afraid of because the decision was made. I asked him what the decision was. He said that this was the line, that we weren't moving off it. I asked him about the smile. He was quiet again. Longer this time. Then he said, when he stepped forward, I recognized it. What he was doing. I'd read the protocols. I knew what it meant. And for some reason, knowing what it meant made it less frightening, not more. Because it meant he was doing something I'd studied, something I understood. And anything I understand, I can respond to. I asked him if he'd been afraid. He said, the whole time, completely. I asked him if he had a moment where he thought about walking away. He looked at me steadily. He said, no. Just that, no hesitation. I said, why not? He said, because of them. And he gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the station beyond, toward the 6 others on his team, toward the Marathi academics in the archive, toward the Selani loading crew, toward the Hikari captain on the freighter ramp, toward every living being on Kelvarath 9 that morning. Because of all of them, they were watching, and what they saw was going to matter for a long time, not just today, long time. He picked up his coffee. He took a sip. He said, "My grandmother always told me, don't do the right thing when it's easy. Anyone can do the right thing when it's easy. Do it when it's the hardest possible thing you can imagine. That's the only version that counts." He was quiet. Then he said, "She also told me to always come home." He smiled, the same small, private smile I'd seen in the security footage. He said, "Working on it." I interviewed Harakvel on the 4th day. His testimony is, by his own request, partially sealed. There are sections that involve internal Voakai military assessments that he provided under the condition of confidentiality, and I honor that condition. But the portion he agreed to release is in this archive. He said the operation's strategic objective had been access to specific documentation in the Kelvarath Accords archive. Documentation that the Voakai High Command believed had been altered to misrepresent certain territorial agreements from the Compact's founding period. He said the decision to send 42 warriors was a deliberate show of capability, intended to ensure compliance without the need for actual engagement. He said it plainly, they expected compliance. I asked him at what point he realized compliance was not what he was going to receive. He said, when I saw the sergeant's eyes. I asked him to explain. He said, I have faced 31 species in engagement or near-engagement contexts. I know how to read eyes. Every species has a threshold, a point where the calculation in their processing shifts from defense to survival to submission. I look for that threshold. I look for the moment when the calculation tips. When I took the step forward, I looked for the threshold. He paused. He said there was no threshold. I asked him what he meant. He said, in the human sergeant's eyes, there was no threshold. The calculation was not shifting. He was afraid I could see that. The biological markers of fear were clear, but the threshold was not there. The point where fear becomes the dominant variable, it was not there, and I have never encountered that before. He was quiet for a moment. Then we did not withdraw because of the numbers. 7 humans against 42 Voakai. That is not a military equation that produces withdrawal. We withdrew because of what I saw, because I looked into that man's eyes and I understood something my briefing documents had not prepared me for. I asked, what was that? He said that he was not calculating survival. He had already moved past survival as a variable. He was only calculating the line, where it was, and that he would not move past it. And when a creature has removed survival from its calculation, when it has decided that the line matters more than its own continuity, there is nothing you can do to it. There is no force that produces a useful result, because force only works on things that are trying to survive. And in that moment he was not. He looked at me. He said, I have studied humans for 30 cycles. I have read every threat assessment, every combat report, every behavioral profile, and none of them told me about this. None of them told me what happens when a human decides something matters more than surviving. He said, we do not have a term for it in our language. We have never needed one. The thing about Kelvarath 9, the thing that I've spent months trying to put into words for this archive, is that nothing actually happened. I want you to understand that, in the conventional sense, in the sense of things you can point to in an incident report and write, on this date at this time, the following events occurred. 7 humans and 42 Voakai warriors stood in a bay. Words were exchanged. No shots were fired. No blood was drawn. No one was hurt. A Volkai delegation walked to a documentation office and filed paperwork. 42 warriors returned to their ships and left. Nothing happened. And yet I watched from the observation gallery as the Selani loading crew on berth 6, who had been frozen in place for 4 minutes, moved again and moved differently. They were louder, more themselves. They laughed at something one of them said, this big, startled laugh that echoed off the bay floor, and it sounded like relief-given sound. One of the Hikari crew members on the berth 7 ramp started clapping, a gesture he had apparently picked up from human contact, because it's not a Hikari signal at all, but he was doing it. A slow, rhythmic clap that his crewmates looked at in confusion, and then, one by one, began to imitate. I watched Cruz come back out of the documentation office, after walking Harakvel through the filing process, and I watched Yuki Tanaka and Priya Okonkwo meet him in the corridor, and I couldn't hear what they said, the corridor mics were off for that section. But I watched Cruz say something and both of them laughed, and Cruz put a hand briefly on each of their shoulders. And there was something in that small gesture, that ordinary human gesture, that completely undid me. I had to sit down. I've cataloged hundreds of incidents. I've written the official records for battles and atrocities and diplomatic disasters and unexpected triumphs. I've sat in rooms with the survivors of unspeakable things and tried to put their experiences into language that would do justice to them. I don't know if I have language that does justice to this. 7 humans held a line against 42 of the most dangerous warriors in the known galaxy. They held it without firing a shot. They held it without bluster or false bravado or the kind of performative aggression that makes good footage and poor outcomes. They held it scared, quiet, hands steady and hands trembling, thinking about daughters and grandmothers and promises made, and the weight of what watching eyes decide. And the galaxy's strongest warriors looked at them and walked away. In the months following the Kelvarath 9 incident, 3 things happened that I believe belong in this record. First, the Volkai High Militant Council, in a document that was communicated to the Galactic Compact Security Division, formally revised their official threat assessment rating for human military personnel. The previous rating, established 40 years ago during the First Contact period, was Category 3, Notable Capability, Limited Tactical Concern. The new rating is Category 1, Maximum Threat Assessment, Strategic Priority. This makes humans, a species that has been in the Compact for less than 60 years, a species that controls a single planet and a handful of orbital installations and 2 permanent outposts in adjacent systems. The only species in the current Compact membership rated Category 1 by the Volkai. The only other entities to have held that rating in Volkai military history are now extinct. The Volkai don't discuss what happened to them. Second, within 2 months of the Kelvarath 9 incident, 17 different galactic military organizations, not the Volkai, other species, including some who were Volkai allied, quietly reached out to the Terran Defense Coordination Office to request joint training programs. Not intelligence sharing. Not strategic partnerships. Training programs. They wanted to understand, apparently, not just what humans could do, but how humans prepared to do it. I find that detail remarkable. These are species that, in some cases, have been building armies for longer than Terran civilization has existed. They want to know how humans train. Third, Sergeant Major Alejandro Cruz was promoted. He received the Galactic Compact's Sentinel Cross, the highest non-combat honor the Compact awards for military action that prevents rather than causes casualties. The ceremony was attended by representatives of 41 member species. Harakvel attended. He sat in the 3rd row. He did not move or speak during the ceremony. When Cruz came down from the podium afterward, with the medal on his chest and his team around him, Harakvel approached him. I was there, I watched. Harakvel extended his right hand. It is not a Volkai gesture. It is a Terran one, the handshake, the open palm extension that indicates no weapon, that says, "I am offering something, not taking something." Cruz looked at it for a moment. Then he shook it. The two of them stood there, warrior and warrior, for a few seconds. I don't know what passed between them. I was too far away to hear, and neither of them included it in their formal testimony. But I watched Herekvel walk away afterward, and I watched him stop, halfway across the room, and look back at Cruz once more. And I could not read the expression on his face, because Vokai facial anatomy does not accommodate the expressions most other species use. But I have my interpretation. I think he was still trying to understand it. I think he will be trying for a while. I am not a creature who uses language carelessly. 31 years as an archivist trains you out of that tendency, if you had it to begin with. I try to record what I observe. I try to resist the pull of narrative, the human concept, that I have studied and come to appreciate, of making things into stories with meanings that perhaps the events themselves were not trying to communicate. But I have a conclusion I want to include in this record, clearly labeled as my own interpretive addition, and not as objective documentation. What happened on Kelvarath 9 on the 14th day of the 7th month was not about military capability. Every analysis I've seen since frames it in terms of military capability, what humans can do, what their tactical options were, what their threat profile looks like on a strategic chart. Those analyses are not wrong. They are simply incomplete. What happened was about something the threat assessment documents don't have a category for. 7 humans were afraid and held a line anyway. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what stopped 42 Vokai warriors who, by every measurable dimension, could have done whatever they came to do and left before the rest of the galaxy could respond. They stopped because of what they saw. They saw the fear. And they saw what the fear didn't do. And that, I think, is what none of the old documents prepared Herekvel for, because most creatures, when afraid, reach towards survival. They calculate. They accommodate. They find the version of events that keeps them breathing. It is not weakness. It is the most fundamental logic of being a living thing in a dangerous universe. But humans sometimes, not always, not without cost, not without the trembling in the hands, do something else. They find a line. They stand on it. And they look at the thing that frightens them and they say, "Not here. Not today. Not while I am standing in this spot." And they mean it. And something about the meaning of it, something about the absolute, unqualified, non-negotiable meaning of it, is apparently legible across every species in the known galaxy. Because the strongest warriors turned away. Not because 7 humans were stronger. Because 7 humans were decided. And decided, it turns out, is something stronger than strong. I'll end with this. 3 weeks after the incident, I was closing up the observation gallery for the night. Late. Most of the station was on its overnight cycle, running at half-staff, the bay lights below dimmed to amber gold maintenance level. I had been working late on this documentation, on trying to find words for what I'd seen, and I was tired in the way that comes from trying to say something true for a long time. I went to the gallery window. I do that sometimes when I need to think. The stars out there don't offer answers, but they offer scale, and scale is sometimes what you need. Berth 3 Alpha was dark below me. The archive entrance was sealed for the night, routine security protocols. Nothing remarkable about it, just a door. I stood there looking at it for a while. 7 people had stood between that door and 42 warriors. 7, the same number as the days in a Terran week. The same number as the musical notes in their primary scale. An ordinary number, nothing cosmic about it. 7 people had been afraid and held a line, and the galaxy's strongest warriors had looked at them and turned around. I stood at the gallery window for a long time. I thought about what Nadia Voss had said, 22 years old, from a city of rain and sea and long winters, 14 months in service, hands on her kit making sure everything was properly secured because she refused to go out there with anything loose. I didn't want them to decide wrong. I thought about what that means, the decision of everyone watching, the way a moment like that one ripples out, not in the dramatic way of battles and treaties, not in the way history books prefer, but in the quieter way. In the way that changes what watching eyes believe is possible. That, I thought, standing in the amber dark of an observation gallery on a working station that smells of recycled air and thruster coolant, and the anxious salt of Marathi diplomats, that is what Cruz meant when he said they were watching and what they saw was going to matter for a long time. He was right. It's going to matter. I've been an archivist for 31 years, and I've never been more certain of anything. What those 7 humans did, quiet, afraid, unmoved, is going to matter for a very long time. Filed and sealed. Archivist Vuncel. Kelvarath 9, Historical Record Bureau. End of document. Addendum, field notes, unsealed by request, 40-cycle moratorium waived. The following informal notes were included with the official filing by Archivist Vuncel at the time of original submission. They were sealed with the primary document and are released here as part of the complete historical record. I don't usually include personal notes in official filings. This one time, I went to find Cruz the morning after I finished my interviews. He was in the station cafeteria, early, the kind of early that tells you someone didn't sleep much. He had his coffee again, the kind he made himself. He was looking out the window at the docking bay below, the same bay, and the morning light was coming in at a low angle and making everything that amber gold color. I sat down across from him without being invited. He looked at me. He didn't seem surprised. I said, "I have one more question, off the record." He nodded. I said, "What do you carry with you? When you do something like that, what carries you through it?" He was quiet for a while. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Then he said, "My grandmother used to tell me this story, about her father. He was a farmer way back in a part of the world where farming was how you survived the winter. And one year there was a drought and everything was dying and the other farmers in the region were giving up, packing their animals, leaving. And her father stayed. He kept farming dried ground with no rain in the forecast, and everyone around him thought he'd lost his mind." Cruz looked at the window. The rains came in the end, late but they came, and his farm was the only one that had stayed tended, so his was the only one ready for them when they came. He was quiet. She always said, "The rains come, they always come, but only the field that kept itself ready gets the benefit of them." I thought about that. Then I said, "What does that have to do with standing in front of 42 Volkai warriors?" He smiled, that small private smile. He said, "You keep the field ready, even when there's no rain, even when every rational calculation says give up. You keep it ready because the rains come eventually and you want to be there when they do." He picked up his coffee. He said, "The line is the field." He drank. I sat with him for a while longer. We didn't talk much. The bay below filled with the ordinary morning, ships arriving, crews moving, the Hikari freighter from the day of the incident still docked in berth 7, its loading ramps extended. Ordinary, all of it ordinary. Everything ordinary, and the field tended, and the rains somewhere out there across all those amber-lit stars, coming. End of personal addendum.